Believe me when I say there's nothing better in football than a successful hate watch. It's even borderline better than watching your own team win if we're being honest. But even I, an avid hate watcher, need to put that to the side and objectively talk about how Arsenal this season have pretty much bottled everything that they've set out to do. And before you point out the obvious, yes, I am a Manchester United fan. Our club has been terrible. We're currently 14th place. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, I know, you don't have to remind me. But that does not change a single aspect of how Arsenal season's gone. One truth doesn't negate the other. With that being said, if we take a look at things objectively, Arsenal have bottled everything this season. And I've given my flowers to Arteta and Arsenal in the past, as over these last few years, they've done a complete 180 from banter club to serious contender in the Premier League. But a transformation like that is going to come with a massive spike in expectations that Arsenal massively under-delivered this season. Last year, they battled it out with City in the Premier League and came up short by just 2 points. And in the process, they also got bounced out of the EFL Cup in the 4th round, the 3rd round of the FA Cup, and in the quarterfinals in the Champions League to their biggest haters, Bayern Munich. So again, falling short in multiple competitions for realistically the 2nd season in a row. So surely, after a campaign like this, Arteta and Arsenal would sharpen their tools and come in next season ready to dominate. Was Arsenal scoring more goals than they should have been considering they didn't have a proper 9? And was this eventually going to be unsustainable? Yes, of course, but none of that mattered. Did the club need quality backup for their attacking options that had been almost ran into the ground? Yes, but no problem, all would be addressed in due time. And in order to prepare for this current season, the club signed Euro 2024 breakout Ricardo Calafiori for 45 million euros, Mikel Merino for 32 million euros, and Raheem Sterling, am I seeing this right? Sterling in big 2025? Okay, I guess. Raheem Sterling on loan from Chelsea. Oh, and they also sold the attacking depth in Emil Smith-Rowe and Eddie Nketiah. So they signed good defensive options, and they only really brought in Raheem Sterling for attacking depth. Surely nothing would go wrong, right? So with the transfers being made to fortify the squad, the team preparing over the summer and coming in ready to dominate the season, how did Arsenal end up bottling everything? And real quick boys, if you're new to the channel enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so make sure to hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Let me know if you guys think Arsenal did bottle this season in the comments down below. With that being said boys, let's get into the bottling job that Arsenal committed this season. So of course we have to take it back to the beginning of the campaign in August of 2024. Arsenal would get the campaign started with a few people missing in the squad due to injury, and at this point of the year it wasn't that much of a concern as it was guys who were there mostly to provide depth like Kieran Tierney and Tomiyasu. So with a mostly fit and ready squad, Arsenal would get the Premier League season started as they easily dispatched Wolves in their first match. But more impressively, they would follow this up by beating a very strong Aston Villa side 2-0 away from home. Considering the trajectory of that Villa side and how much Emery and Arteta are compared, this was a massive result and it gave somewhat of a feeling that maybe, just maybe, Arsenal could actually do something this year. But this is where the wheels started to become looser. Following match week, Arsenal would play Brighton at home, and even though Brighton was a solid team, the expectation was always going to be that Arsenal was going to win at home. Well, after an audacious chip put Arsenal up 1-0 before halftime, Arteta would have felt that the prophecy would be foretold, but then it all came crashing down. Rice would get a controversial second yellow card and thus would be sent off, and this gave Brighton the platform to equalize just 10 minutes later, and Arsenal would drop a vital 2 points just 3 games into the season. Oh, and mind you, before this game, Mikel Merino would injure his shoulder in his first training session with Arsenal, which meant that his debut would be delayed. It wasn't fully panic stations yet if you asked Arsenal fans at that point of the year, but this did kick off a run of bad games for Arsenal that would see them drop some vital points. So the next few months they would pretty much falter anytime they had to play a decent opponent. To give you a reference, they only beat Spurs, which the spirit of the North London derby gave them a boost for, Leicester, Southampton, Bolton, Preston, West Ham, Shakhtar, Sporting Lisbon, and a little bit more impressive PSG and Forest. To contrast that, the teams that they would drop points to would be City, Chelsea, Bournemouth, Liverpool, and Inter Milan. So in pretty much all the games where they had to beat opponents that realistically were either at their level, performing around their level, or better, they faltered. At this point, the issues at the club had become more concerning as there was a clear regression from the Arsenal side that we had seen last year that could beat anyone in front of them. They looked frail at times and realistically lacked the cutting edge when it came down to it. And what didn't help for Arsenal around this time was that they would lose key players to injuries such as Zinchenko, Ben White, Timber, Calafiori, and most importantly, Martin Odegaard. Odegaard was very dearly missed as even though Saka picked up some of the slack, there was still a massive lack of creativity coming from the squad, especially in the time where they needed it the most. These injuries did allow guys from Miles Lewis-Skelly and Waneri to come into the limelight and provide some hope for the now and for the future, but there was still a certain something missing. And throughout this more or less first third of the season, they would never touch the first place spot in the Premier League, which already went to show how much they had fallen off behind compared to last season. season. Come the end of November, an Arsenal team that was battered, bruised, and playing worse football than they were last season were already in second place and 9 points off of Liverpool. Of course, still a long way to go in the season, but there was definitely question marks on how this team was going to be able to handle missing so much defensive depth and a creative star in Martin Odegaard, but the trust was still there in Arteta and in the squad if you asked any Arsenal fans around that time. But going into the month of December, Arsenal really needed to get it together, because really this is the period that ends up making or breaking most teams across the league, whatever their aspirations are. But unfortunately for Arsenal, this month would pretty much kick off right where the last one left off. They would beat United 2-0, which is great because you always want to beat your rivals, but then the following week in the Premier League they would go on to draw against Everton at home 0-0. An Everton side that was still under Sean Dyche and had only won 3 out of 10 of its last games. With results like these, Arsenal would struggle to pick up any points on Liverpool, and again just continue to show regression. But after this match, they did at least manage to take care of business for the rest of the month. They went undefeated in the Champions League, they had a victory over Palace in the EFL Cup, and also easily got past Palace in the league and also beat Ipswich. But that game against Ipswich would see disaster strike for Arsenal, as the player that Arteta had given almost no rest to, Arsenal star boy and engine behind anything positive, Bukayo Saka, would suffer an injury that would see him face some significant time out. Arsenal were already behind in the league and struggling with injuries across the pitch, and Saka's absence was going to be one that was felt drastically. And look, to be honest with you, if we're looking at the time period of the end of December, by this point it really felt like the league was Liverpool's to lose. And really, if you ask anyone, that was definitely the sentiment at the time. In fact, around this time, Patrice Evra came out and said that watching Arsenal is like watching Netflix because you always have to wait for the next season. Objectively, that is hilarious, but that does go to show how little belief anyone had in the club to actually turn things around, and missing Bukayo Saka was not going to do them any favors. His injury really felt like the final nail in the coffin for any title aspirations for them, even though they were only 7 points off the top. So after they lost Saka, the month of January would be a really tough one for Arsenal. They would win 2 games and draw 2 in the Premier League. They would get shut out and bounced out of the EFL Cup over 2 legs against Newcastle, and got bounced out of the FA Cup by a historically bad Manchester United side at home in penalties. They did at least lock in for the Champions League and managed to finish in an automatic qualification spot, but considering they had easy opponents, there was definitely more attention being placed to their domestic form, because now by the end of January, which was around match day 23, they were 10 points behind the Liverpool team that didn't look like they were slowing down anytime soon. Realistically, now by this point, end of January, Arsenal was done. It did not feel like they had a chance. You ask Arsenal fans, they would probably tell you otherwise because they're delusional, but everyone knew it was over. There was just too many problems when it came down to it. Riddled with injuries, they couldn't score consistently, they were playing too pragmatic, they had a loss of a dynamic style of play, and this was the point where it really felt that Arsenal had bottled their chance to win the league. And you have to realize there are certain narratives that go into this idea that Arsenal bottled the league this season. People aren't just saying that for no reason. Of course, there's the fact that Arteta's 5 years into the job and finally assembled a team that should have been neck and neck with Liverpool, but most importantly, it was down to the fact that for the last 2 years now, Arsenal's biggest excuse when it came to the league was that they were forced to compete with Manchester City super team under Pep, and to an extent, you can understand it. City have been a very well-funded machine. They won a treble, they won 4 back-to-back Prem titles. This is a historically great Manchester City team, so to an extent, you get it. But this season, specifically this current campaign, Manchester City has been a shell of their former self since day one, and Arsenal never looked ready to capitalize on this terrible form from them. Instead, they themselves regressed and pretty much slipped up and let Liverpool walk away with the league, if we're being honest. And yes, you can blame injuries, but when Arteta has been here for so long, has run his own players into the ground, has not recruited back up well enough, and has failed to coach these guys to a league title when the chance was there, then who's really to blame? Arne Slot inherited a Liverpool team that was dominant under a completely different manager, came in with his own principles, and dominated the league in his own way. Arteta and Arsenal had the opportunity to have a magical year, but by just match day 3, they were already dropping silly points and showing those signs of regression which never really got fixed, and thus by the end of January, they weren't even being considered to win the league, even though it was mathematically possible. Again, I'm gonna be real with you, I enjoyed this. I'm an Arsenal hater, but we do have to be objective. In pretty much just the month of January, it felt like they bottled 3 big opportunities. They never gained any points on Liverpool and pretty much gave them the platform to run away with the league. They got bounced out of the FA Cup and they got bounced out of the EFL Cup. And in case you think I'm being hyperbolic when I mentioned that Arsenal gave Liverpool the platform to run away with the league, and in case you haven't heard the news, Liverpool won the league. Everyone's forecast was correct because Liverpool pretty much just kept smacking their opposition and won the title. Come April 27th, Liverpool smacked Spurs and secured their 2nd ever Premier League. At that point in time, Arsenal was 15 13 points behind them. Everyone was right. The only people who still were delusional enough to think that Arsenal had a chance was Arsenal fans. Literally December, January, everyone knew it was Liverpool's to win. They bottled the league halfway through. The inconsistent and poor results pretty much continued for Arsenal even when Saka came back into the squad, and Liverpool just never looked back. So all this pretty much left Arsenal with one competition to try and win, the Champions League. Like I mentioned earlier, Arsenal had secured themselves an automatic spot into the round of 16 thanks to the fact that they finished top 8 in the league stage. However, when the draws were made, Arsenal were definitely thrown into the more difficult side, as potential opponents included Real Madrid or Man City, who faced each other in the round of 32, Atletico Madrid, PSG, Aston Villa, and Liverpool. But first they had to get past their own round of 16 opponents, PSV. All respects to the Dutch club, but Arsenal just pretty much had their way with them. There was never really a competition. Arsenal would win 9-3 on aggregate over 2 legs, but it was only going to get tougher from here for Arsenal. And in a match that pretty much had everyone licking their lips, Arsenal would match up against Real Madrid in the quarterfinal. On paper, people gave Arsenal zero chance. Real Madrid in their Galacticos 3.0 era had been very inconsistent all season, but were seemingly growing in form in the Champions League as they had dispatched Man City and Atletico Madrid already. Add to this their overall European pedigree, their clutch gene, their star-studded talent all over the pitch, how bad Arsenal had been domestically, and Real Madrid were seen as favorites. But had anyone peeled back the layers, they 100% would have seen that Arsenal still had a chance against this specific Real Madrid side. We're talking about Madrid from 2-3 years ago, obviously 2016, 2017, no chance. This Arsenal team gets blown out the water. But this current season of Real Madrid, Arsenal had a chance. Because when I say that Real Madrid has been inconsistent this season, that's a little bit of an understatement. There were games this year where Real, despite having the Galacticos, looked absolutely terrible if we're being honest. Pair that with injury problems that they had at the back, a lack of tactical prowess from Ancelotti at this stage of his career, and how defensively great Arsenal had been, it had all brewed into what actually transpired. 2 brilliant free kicks in the first leg, paired with a great Marino strike, saw Arsenal go to the Bernabeu 3-0 up. And after a week of remontada talk, the same Madrid side that had been so on and off all season would have another terrible game at home, allowing Arsenal to dominate and come out as 2-1 victors on the day and 5-1 winners on aggregate. A massive feat for Arsenal without a shadow of the doubt, because they pretty much proved so many people wrong and they maintained their unbeaten streak against Real Madrid. But if you ask me, Arsenal as a whole, from the fan base all the way to the dressing room, pretty much got caught up in the celebration, and going into the next round, they felt like they were starting to underestimate their next opponent, PSG. PSG, of course, over the years has been very lackluster in Europe, but this year, without a shadow of a doubt, have been one of the best teams in Europe, specifically getting better game by game. They quickly grew into this season. They played dominating, pressing, and free-flowing football, and looked capable of beating literally anybody, notably forcing people to take them seriously after they knocked out Liverpool. So with that, Arsenal had to try their best to take down this PSG side. So for the first leg, PSG had to play at the Emirates, which definitely gave Arsenal a home field advantage, as we saw against Real Madrid. But the game would not go how Arsenal hoped. So for this first leg, PSG pretty much pulled out a full blitz on Arsenal, which allowed them to grab an early goal. The rest of the match was very back and forth, with both sides generating chances, but PSG was able to hold on to the lead despite Arsenal's best efforts. PSG always looked the better side, and now they had the benefit of going back to Paris for the second leg. And look, I'm gonna be real with you. I'm recording this video the day before the game even takes place, and I already know Arsenal's gonna bottle this game. This entire season, Arsenal has been playing with this sort of kind of attitude that they're better than everyone else, despite the fact that it hasn't necessarily been true.
Martin Odegaard taking pics of Stu with a Kodak, or better yet, go to Pot de France, take a picture of B with a Kodak, because we can overturn this first leg deficit. I just want you to know that.
And that's really bit them in the butt, especially against PSG. And in the first leg, Arsenal had some good chances. They definitely required something big from Donnarumma, but even then, I don't think they were a formidable machine. These two teams are matched up very well, but PSG away from home definitely could have gotten more out of that match. And at home, PSG is going to be able to hold the ball as well as they can, and they're bound to score at least one goal, which is going to force Arsenal to come out of their shape and try and score, which is going to leave room in behind for PSG. I'm calling it now. Arsenal are going to lose this match and thus bottle the final competition that they had a chance to win, seeing them go trophyless for yet another season. So in the Premier League, they regressed. They played terrible in the FA Cup and got knocked out by a terrible Manchester United team. They bottled the EFL Cup against Newcastle and pretty much got dogged out over 2 legs. And then in the final competition, the one where they actually somewhat showed some improvement, once the going got tough against PSG, they pretty much fumbled the opportunity. Hence, they bottled it. And anytime Arsenal this season in the Champions League actually had to face a tough opponent, Atalanta, Inter Milan, and now PSG, they fumbled. The PSG they played earlier this season when they did beat them 2-0, entirely different team. That PSG looked lost. They weren't playing the same way. Like I said, they'd grown into the season. So going into this matchup, everyone but Arsenal fans knew this was not the same PSG team. But alas, they've shown regression everywhere. They haven't won anything. Arteta's going into his 6th year. They need a striker. They can't score goals. They're way off their point tally from last season. They might not even finish top 4. This, honestly, is an embarrassment of a season. You can say it's not a bottle job, but realistically, after the 2 years they just had, the expectations were a lot higher and they did not finish anywhere near they should have been. So in my opinion, that's a bottle job.